It strikes me there is a detail in your book, Where the Law Ends Inside the Mueller Investigation, that has received too little attention against the backdrop of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And that is that Paul Manafort, who you were responsible for prosecuting, met with a top Putin ally, Konstantin Kilimnik, and agreed to a deal that would essentially have enabled Putin to take control of the eastern part of Ukraine with Trump's approval. And Manafort had implicitly agreed to this. Why has this not gotten more attention against the backdrop of the invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin?
Paul Manafort, there is a name that you don't hear much of these days, though Manafort was a regular in the news cycle just a few years ago, which I know feels like a very long time ago. So just to refresh your memory a little bit, Paul Manafort was Trump's one-time campaign manager, and he was imprisoned after he was convicted of 8 counts of financial crimes. That's 5 counts of tax fraud, 2 counts of bank fraud, and 1 count of failing to report a foreign bank account. Additionally, he later pleaded guilty to conspiracy against the United States and witness tampering as part of a plea deal with special counsel Robert Mueller. All of that said, though, Manafort will likely be remembered for colluding with Russia during the 2016 presidential election on behalf of Donald Trump, specifically passing internal Trump campaign information along to Russian intelligence. Reporting from The Times said Manafort proposed a confidential strategy plan as early as June 2005 that he would influence politics, business dealings, and news coverage inside the United States, Europe, and former Soviet republics to benefit President Vladimir Putin's government, even as U.S.-Russia relations under Republican President George W. Bush grew worse. We are now of the belief that this model can greatly benefit the Putin government if employed at the correct levels with the appropriate commitment to success, Manafort wrote in the 2005 memo to Russian aluminum magnate Oleg Deripaska. The effort, Manafort wrote, will be offering a great service that can refocus both internally and externally the policies of the Putin government. Manafort was convicted in 2018, then he was pardoned by Trump in 2020, and then in 2022, he wrote a book called Political Prisoner: Persecuted, Prosecuted, but Not Silenced. So, tell us how you really feel, Paul. It's crazy how people like Paul Manafort always manage to frame themselves as victims, but judging from the book's Amazon reviews, it's even more crazy how many people they're able to convince that they are actually the victims. So in the book, he did rightly claim that Trump would run again in 2024 for the presidency and win, so good for him there, but he also echoed the Trump world talking point that everything pertaining to the Trump campaign and Russia was a hoax perpetuated by people who were desperate to defeat Donald Trump. But Manafort has been on his pro-Russia mission, as you heard, for far longer than Trump has even been politically relevant. He was active in this pro-Russia movement at least since the George W. Bush administration, which was from the early 2000s. That was back when I was in high school, and just for context, my 20-year reunion is coming up next year. But now that he's out of jail, now that he's already written his book, Paul Manafort is back to work on behalf of the Trump administration, but more so on behalf of the Putin government. Not only was Manafort at the 2024 Republican National Convention, but as you saw in the clip I played for you earlier, he has been negotiating with Putin with Trump's approval over how much of Ukraine Russia will be able to annex following its invasion. In that clip from PBS, former Mueller prosecutor Andrew Weissmann was discussing his book, Where Law Ends, Inside the Mueller Investigation. Specifically, he was being asked about the claim he makes in his book that Manafort met with Konstantin Kilimnik to discuss the Ukrainian annexation. Margaret Hoover asked Weissmann why that detail wasn't a bigger story in the media when it was first reported, and here is his response.
So I don't know why it has not gotten more attention, but I had the exact same reaction when the war occurred and you saw what Russia was trying to do. I was like, yes, of course. We had in writing, we'd sort of captured some emails between Konstantin Kilimnik and Paul Manafort talking about this deal and saying what they needed to make this work was a wink from Donald Trump that this would happen. But take Trump out of this. This was clearly indicating what it is that Mr. Putin was trying to do, which was to take half of Ukraine and actually the wealthy part of Ukraine. And now you see it's basically, I want to take all of it. It did get some attention in the New York Times. It certainly got attention in the Senate report, but it was such a clear indication of what Vladimir Putin was trying to do.
The New York Times did do a piece in 2020 discussing Manafort's ties to Kilimnik, who was identified as a Russian intelligence officer, but of course this was prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The article said, their link was the single most direct tie between senior Trump campaign officials and the Russian intelligence services, according to the fifth and final volume of the committee's report on its bipartisan 3-year investigation issued Tuesday. While the committee was stymied in its efforts to fully plumb the relationship between the two men, investigators found enough there to declare that Mr. Manafort created a, quote, grave counterintelligence threat by sharing inside information about the presidential race with Mr. Kilimnik and the Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs whom he served. The report portrayed Mr. Manafort as deeply compromised by years of business dealings with those oligarchs. Collectively, they had paid him tens of millions of dollars, lent him millions more, and may also have owed him millions. And just for clarification, when we were talking about those Ukrainian oligarchs, this was before Zelensky became president of Ukraine. But as Weissmann said, it is clear, according to the information that Mueller and his team had unearthed and so many other pieces of evidence, what Putin was trying to do all along. He clearly thinks of himself as the czar whose mission it is to restore the glory of the Russian Empire and then to expand that empire, even if all he ends up with at the end of everything is Crimea, which he took prior to the current invasion and onslaught. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be surprising that Russia would walk away from everything with an additional piece of Ukraine. It wouldn't be fair, but it also wouldn't be surprising. There are a few pro-Russian districts in Ukraine that seem likely to go over to Russia, but again, while it's not fair or just, Russia will make sure that they get at least something back in exchange for their efforts, in exchange for all of the young Russian soldiers that Putin sacrificed for his imperialistic delusions. And what's sad about this is also the fact that things like this happen all throughout history all the time, which is what people who defend things like this will remind you of. But just because these things are common and historical doesn't mean that they're right, and it doesn't mean that they should keep happening. There are so many issues that we are dealing with today that were the result of past deals done badly or with bad intent, the most obvious of which is probably Israel and Gaza, but also China and Hong Kong, India and Pakistan, and a plethora of smaller conflicts and issues that don't get as much coverage as those much bigger ones. Problems don't go away with a news cycle or even with a generation. Creating new problems in an attempt to solve the previous one will also have negative repercussions down the line, sometimes not even that much further down the line. Today, it feels as though we are constantly putting out small fires in a futile attempt to control a blaze, and the attempt is futile because the same people putting out those small fires are the same ones pouring fuel onto the blaze. And it will be nice when our planet is no longer being run by psychotic and delusional men, but alas, we have never known a period in history when that has not been the norm. There is still reason for hope for a better future, but it's not going to come easily. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.